on the News Channel 5 network. This is Open Line.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Open Line. Good show tonight, and we want to hear from you. We're talking about the very emotional debate of Airbnbs, short-term rental properties. It has dominated the Metro Council. People have strong opinions on both sides, and the state legislature has even talked about coming in and taking the right to regulate them away from the Metro Council. We want to talk about all of that. Happy to have with us Jim Schulman, Councilman at Large Jim Schulman. You've been put on an ad hoc committee, right?
That's right.
To try and iron out differences or whatever. Why were you chosen for this committee?
The vice mayor saw this issue coming to a head. You know, there's a lot of moving parts on this one. You've got several bills out there outstanding. You've got this action that could be taken by the General Assembly. I think the vice mayor looked at the situation and thought, we should try to resolve this. We should try to come up with some type of resolution with all the parties. I'll tell you, it's a nasty issue. It's people are very strong in their opinions on either side. A lot of people involved in this. Knew it was going to be a difficult issue. Why did I get picked? I think I was unlucky, maybe, but basically, I think I got picked by the vice mayor because I really hadn't taken a position on this. This is not really my issue. I got lots of other things I'm working on, but I think he was looking to try to put together a committee of maybe two people that were for it, two people against, and maybe one person who really hadn't taken a position, and that was me. He asked me if I would do it, and I said, sure.
And that's the point I wanted to make, that instead of having two sides up here that are complete opposite ends, maybe yelling at each other, what we have is you were chosen to do this because it was determined you could hopefully be fair and impartial on this. You hadn't really taken a side.
That's right. And I also, as you know, grew up around the state legislature, and I also learned from some of the best in terms of how you bring parties together. You know, different ways, but I mean, basically you sit both parties down and you try to listen to everything you can, and then you keep pushing people, if you can, together. So ultimately, you either get a bill that that both sides like, which is almost impossible, or you get a bill that both sides don't like. That's usually what happens, but because both sides don't like it, you know that you've succeeded because you've got both sides kind of, well, I really don't like that, but I can live with it. This has been difficult. This one's a hard one.
And we do want to hear from you. So we'll take phone calls. The number there is at the bottom of the screen. We'll also so we are streaming this live on our News Channel 5 Facebook page. I will read appropriate comments as the show goes on. If you have a question or comment, you can certainly place the comment in the comments section there on Facebook. We'll read those on the air. But let's talk about, so where do things stand?
Well, there's several bills pending. There's a bill that we call 608, which basically says on non-owner occupied, there's three types of short-term rental properties, but these are type 2s. Non-owner occupies, they would be, if that bill passed, it would be phased out. Those would be phased out in residential zones, an R or an RS zone, over the next 3 years. So in the end, you could still have non-owner occupied, but they'd only have to be in certain zoning districts, like commercial districts. They could not be in residential districts. That bill's pending. Then you have what is referred to as the committee bill, which is known affectionately as 937. That bill is pending before the Planning Commission next week. That's the bill that is sort of what we would call the resolution bill, that tries to kind of come into something which hopefully people can live with. People don't necessarily like it, but it's kind of, it's a resolution. It's an effort to resolve this so that we can pass something, the General Assembly won't bother with us, and we can go on regulating, which is part of our responsibility. And there's a third bill, I forget the number, but it's brought by Councilman Brett Withers, which is a little different from the ad hoc bill. It grandfathers all non-owner occupied in, and that's what it does. It just, on the non-owner occupied, doesn't do anything else, but it just grandfathers the existing ones in, no more. That's what his bill does.
And when we're talking about owner-occupied, there's a lot of jargon here. Certainly people are educated if they've been following this. Non-owner-occupied, what we're seeing is people put up a building that would have 12 Airbnbs in it. It's like a mini hotel, right?
Well, so type 1's type 2, type 3. Okay. Type 1 is if you own a home and you live there and you rent out one of your rooms. Okay, that was the whole initial start, I think, for Airbnb.
Right.
Okay, and then there's type 2's where you buy a house and you don't live there. It's a non-owner occupied, but you rent it out on weekends to lots of our tourists that show up. That's type 2. Type 3 are where in the multi-use things, where you've got homeowners associations or big buildings with lots of them in there. That's a type 3. The things we're talking about are the type 2s. That's the issue that's before us right now. Those are the homes, the non-owner occupied. So it could be somebody who lives down the street that owns a home but also has a second one and rents that one out. It could be somebody who lives out of state that rents those things, that buys a home in Nashville. Obviously, we have a lot of people visiting, buy the house, they rent it out on weekends.
And when you say that you're trying to get ahead of the legislature on this, let's briefly just talk about that. The legislature has threatened to take away the authority of the Metro Council to make a decision on this, right? And how did that come about, and where does that stand?
Right. So I always be careful with the word threaten. It's just one of those things. But when the 608 bill was filed, which again grandfathers the non-owner occupieds in the residential zones out over 3 years. It's not a ban. It just because you can still have them in other zones, but it phases those out, grandfathers those out in 3 years. The folks who represent Airbnb and HomeAway and those groups simply went up to the legislature. People may not like that, but that's part of their jobs. They went to the state legislature and filed a bill that would essentially say we can't do that. We can't effectively prohibit non-owner occupieds from being in Nashville and Davidson County. So the bill that's floating right now is just for us. A lot of other cities have banned them. The issue is here. This is where the tourists are coming. The issue is here.
Right.
That bill that was filed up in the legislature, it was filed last year. It passed the House. It is now sitting in the Senate Finance Committee. It's been through another Senate committee. It passed there 8-0. It's holding up in the Senate Finance Committee. It depends on who you talk to, but it's the people I've talked to up there said basically it's being held up there waiting to see what we're going to do, see if we can come up with some type of resolution of this issue. I
mean, it sounds to me like, though, if Airbnb is not happy, then they just kind of take this other route.
That's right. So part of what we were doing with the ad hoc committee was, again, listening to as many people as we could. We had 3.5 months worth of meetings. We opened up the meetings, let people talk, ask questions to each other. We did as much as we could, and then we tried to kind of keep pushing until we thought we came up with something that would work, with the understanding that if we can get that done, we are counting on the industry, Airbnb and HomeAway and those groups, to not pursue the legislation up in the General Assembly.
Are you confident we will get to that point?
Well, it sort of depends on what happens. Obviously, if and again, this is my personal opinion, and people may call and disagree, and I understand that. But I think the point was they wanted some type of resolution. You have to go back with this thing back to previous councils and when Airbnb started. We let this happen. I'm on the council. I wasn't on it then, but it's a council responsibility. We let this happen. We let non-owner occupieds. If you don't like them, I understand, but we let them come in. So now if we pass a bill like 608, which again grandfathers them out over 3 years and you can't have them anymore in residential zones, we basically said you can have them. Now we're saying you can't have them, okay? And there's legal arguments on both sides of that. But we allowed that to happen. If we do that, I think the legislature is looking at that and saying that's not acceptable.
Right.
And I don't want to speak for the legislature either. It's just what I'm hearing. But again, what we're trying to do is come up with something that the General Assembly looks at and says it's okay.
Several comments on Facebook. Karen Holmes says, tell the hotels in Nashville to lower the rates so people can afford to vacation here. So she goes right to the hotels, tell them to lower the rates so people can. That is part of what's driving the popularity of Airbnb and these short-term rentals.
So, there's that whole outside argument that we really weren't focused on, but obviously we have lots and lots of people coming to visit Nashville. And if you drive around downtown and look around, there's a bunch of hotels that are being built very, very quickly. But when all this tourism boom happened, we didn't have all the hotel rooms. So I also know that, our hotel rooms are comparable to New York City's rates, and in some cases are more than what you would pay to stay in New York City.
Which is astounding.
Which is amazing. So when we get all these hotel rooms, I think the price is going to drop, and I don't know what that's going to mean for Airbnb. Obviously, if the price drops, you may not necessarily have so many of these. But in many ways, I think what people would say is this represented Airbnbs and HomeAways and places like that represented a place that was cheaper than hotels, a place for people to come stay.
All right, so we will continue to take comments on Facebook. We encourage you to make your comment or give us a call. There's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.